So for the PBL members that are watching, you are currently in my Principles of Management class. And for this workshop, what we're going to do is we're talking today in the management class about our careers and the job interview process. So hopefully by now you have a good resume. We're going to talk about the next step in preparing for the interview. And so I actually submitted to my class a list of 10 really tough interview questions, and we're going to discuss in class the answers that the students have, and I have asked George Truell, our career placement coordinator, to sit in with me, and we're going to talk about some tips and tricks to help you with these job interview questions for when you are going through that process. So anyway, so George, did you want to say anything as we get started?
No, just I would treat this like you're in a job interview. So that would be things like how you're sitting during this process, whether you're sitting up straight, whether you're leaning forward, what your eye contact is. I know you're probably not dressed the way you would be in a job interview, but you're going to get some feedback based on things like, you answered the question, but your eyes are way up here, or things like that, or you're doing things with your hands. A lot of this you're not even aware of until you either capture it on film or somebody shares it with you. So you'd much rather do it in a practice session and when you're having your very, very important, super wonderful job interview that you just botch because of these things.
It's true. And so let's talk about some of those interview questions first that I gave you guys. So the first question I issued out was, why should I hire you? So Tom, why should I hire you?
A lot of the companies in the past have used youth and inexperience, and they want to try to get a person that they can shape and mold that person into the objectives of what that organization is trying to get at. That's changed now with the economy the way it is. Now they're just looking at who has the experience and who has the work ethic. That's where I come in, because even though I'm an older American, I have that years of experience that a young person won't have, even one that has a college degree. But I'm going to college to try to enhance those job experiences that I've had in the past.
What do y'all think? There's only one thing I would change in there.
Okay.
It was really, really good. I wouldn't bring up, because I heard you say, I'm older. I wouldn't bring that up. I would say, I'm experienced, or I've done this, or I've done that. But don't open the door for two reasons. You don't want to plant the seed. And number two, you're putting the recruiter in a real tough position, because basically you said, I'm going to tell you something about myself that you're not allowed to take into consideration. And in the off chance I don't get a job offer, maybe I'll bring that back up, that you didn't choose me because. But beyond that, it was beautiful. I thought it was well done.
I liked it. I will say this. I'm going to add something in there. I would like to see you talking more about specific. Now, this wasn't a specific interview, like a job question. What can you do for this company? Kind of an answer. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that depends on.
And that depends on what you're applying for.
Right.
But just make sure when you are answering this, like in the real world, what it is that you bring to the table for this specific job.
That would depend on what job.
On what your job that you're applying for is. But just a little tip out there. Okay. The second question is, now, this doesn't apply to many of you, but I have a question of, why is there a gap in your work history? Now, if there's not ever any gaps in your work history, maybe there is, you're a young college student, you don't have a lot of experience. So I noticed there's not a lot of work experience on your resume, so please explain what you've been doing with yourself during this period of time. So Brianna, I'm going to ask you that question.
I said, like everyone, life happens, and I need to take a break in my work career.
Okay.
Okay, why don't you don't mind me, just go.
Okay.
This time when you answer the question, answer it like it's an interview. Don't answer it with, well, I put, and let's see how you do with it, okay? Mr. Howard, do you want to ask the question?
Okay. So I noticed there's not a lot of work experience on your resume, or there's some gaps in your work history. Could you please explain that?
Like everyone else, life happens, and I had to take a break from my
Okay.
You leave me hanging here.
You kind of leave us
Because
hanging.
I don't need to give explicit detail in my life to someone.
I get that. And so we need to find, though, a little less vague way of addressing it.
And I wouldn't say like everyone, because you're going to run into other people that aren't like that. That maybe they work for the same place for the last 20 years.
That's
You know.
nice.
Or they don't have gaps in their work history. And so I think you can address it by talking about things you were focused on that you can mention. I was focusing on my education.
Or it's okay to say I had family matters that took my full concentration and responsibility.
And you don't have to go into details, but you can say, I was focusing on my education during that time, or I had some personal family issues that I had to address and deal with during this time, and it caused a gap. Or if you're just not dealing with a lot of work experience, you can say, I don't have a lot of work experience on my resume because I was taking care of my kids and family. That's work experience. Or I was focusing on my education again. I was a student. And so I was focusing on studying and getting good grades so that I could build that part of my life and then get the experience a little bit later. But you always want to try to find the positive in it.
Yeah, in the absence of giving something, you leave it up to them to fill in the blanks. And they might fill in the blanks by thinking, well, maybe 2 years in the state penitentiary. You don't know what they're thinking, but you have the ability, because the ball's in your court, to steer how that's being answered, how it's being, portrayed.
And that's a hard question. These are the hard questions, though, remember. This list of questions are the ones that always put us on the spot. And we're like, and so that's what we want you to be thinking about. How can I formulate an answer in advance? So the third question was, tell me one thing you would change about your last job. David, tell me one thing you would change about your last job.
I would change the leadership qualities and the integrity. My last job, the management kept our employees out of the loop, what wasn't going on. Not in general. I mean, there's a lot of things that we didn't need to know that was going on, but try to keep everybody on the same page and on the same track.
What do you think?
Here's what I'm going to say. I think that you have good thoughts on that. I think what we again have to do is try to spin it into something a little more positive. And I'm going to tell you why. And this is actually something that is common. You don't trash talk your former businesses. They're going to ask you this question to try to trick you into trash talking your other employers. And you don't want to do that, because then that's like, well, okay, he's saying that about this group. What's he going to say about us when he applies for another job in a few months or a few years or however long? So we need to try to find a way of addressing that, and maybe it's focusing on communication. I wish there was better communication, something along those lines.
Own it. One of the things in my last job was I felt I didn't always have enough information. And so I wish now, or if I could do it again, I would. Or one thing that I've learned about that situation so I don't repeat it is when I'm unclear about something, I'll ask follow-up questions to make sure that before I start on something, I get all the information I need. Own it, okay, because he's right. Anything that sounds like, well, my last employer had issues is going to concern anybody.
And communication is always kind of the complaint that you're going to find with people about where they work. And so that's a good one to kind of spin in a way of, I'll own it myself, I wish I asked more questions. Or I wish, or just, you can spin that into something that's not me trash talking my former boss. Does that make sense? You don't want to be dishonest, but you don't want to trash talk.
And that was one thing, kind of how I took it in that direction. And what I'd put is, if I were to change one thing about my last job, it would be my understanding of the bigger picture and how I can be directly related in the decision-making process. Because there was one thing that I tended not to plug myself into that decision-making process because I didn't think I had enough experience. But it was one of those where I would have seen it as a better growing experience for myself had I been more involved.
See, and that's good, and that is a good way to answer. You see, and I think we all can learn from that, our past, and that's kind of where the question needs to go, is how can I learn from that? All right, James, back to you. Tell me about yourself.
Well, I'm 28 years old, married. I have a wife and one kid. And after high school, I graduated with my associates in drafting and design and started working immediately after college for a drafting company doing fire sprinkler design work. I worked for them for almost 3 years, and then in around 2009, into early 2010, I got laid off due to the beginning of the economy. You know, I was the youngest guy in, so I was the first one to go. But during that 18 months, I was still working. I was working for a restaurant part-time. I was working for my dad's construction company part-time until I was able to find full employment again in early 2011 with a cylinder company that was my previous job before moving here to Arkansas. And now I currently work for Eaton Corporation.
Okay, good. What you saw my face, didn't you?
Started off with the personal.
Yeah, you hit again on some things that have absolutely nothing to do with the job, and they're prohibited for the employer to ask. I mean, you can volunteer anything, but those sort of things don't help you at all. It's like saying, I go to Catholic church every Sunday. Okay, it's not anything negative, it just doesn't help. So why would you enter it into there? What I tell people, because you're going to get this question, 99% of your interviews, this is going to be your lead question. Tell me about yourself. Okay? I used it for 30 years. It's a good introductory question, kind of relax, get the mood going, chat. But unfortunately, a lot of times it leads right into, well, me and my girlfriend live in Gamaliel, we got a 6-month-old son, yada, 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 all kinds of things. So what you want to do is what I call the elevator speech. And you can use this in all kinds of settings, but what you want to do is picture yourself stepping into an elevator with somebody else, the door's closed, they turn to you and say, tell me about yourself. By the time the elevator's up to the floor and the door is open, within 30 to 45 seconds, you're going to be able to cover who you are, what you've done, what you're doing, and you covered all these. I was checking them off. It was just your opening. What you want to do, and that part was missing. I didn't hear what you want to do. And then on the closing end, why you'd be really, really good at it. Okay, so you answer that question and you rehearse it, because not only are you going to get it in interviews, you're going to get it when you run into somebody that you went to high school with, you haven't seen in 4 years, or if you're at Sunday, Sunday school or the coffee hour after church, you run into a family friend, they're going to ask you, what have you been up to? I haven't seen you. There you go, because that is called networking too. And that's that scary thing. Everyone thinks networking is slapping one of those hello, my name is, and going into a room of strangers. Networking is how you find jobs. And all it is talking with people about what it is you're doing and what you'd like to do. So 99% of your answer was wonderful. I'd cover what you want to do and why you'd be great at it. And I'd leave out your marital status and your children. Because you might be talking with somebody in a job interview and the job might entail travel, business travel. And they might have a bias against hiring somebody who has a young child for business travel. You never know.
And you never know. And let's talk about this while we're here real quick. And I know it's a little divergent from the topic, but you will get sometimes those illegal here in Arkansas. Let me just say, in our small southern towns, and because I've had students come and ask me this after interviews, and they know they're being asked illegal questions. They know they're being asked things that are inappropriate and illegal. And how do you address that? And sometimes you need to say, you'd never want to make it belligerent and say, I'm sorry, you can't ask me that. That's illegal. Because that shuts the interview down, I think. You have to bring it back around. Well, let's talk about how I can help your company. You need to bring it back to the interview somehow.